Today I'm going to be telling you about all the books I read in the month of August. I'll be honest, August was not a great reading month. I wanted it to be, and it just was not. I read 14 books, but my average rating was pretty low, and I don't really have a lot of books out of this stack that stand out to me as potential favorites of the year, as books that I really remember having a good time with. There's really only a few that I can say that I enjoyed, and there's only one that might make it into a favorites of the year. As always, we're going to go in order from my least favorite to my most favorite, starting with the books that I DNF'd. I asked you guys, I think last month, if you still cared to hear about DNFs, and I feel like the answer was pretty resounding yes, but I am going to try to keep it a little bit more brief for my DNFs. I had 4 books that I did not finish this month. The first one was Voyage of the Damned. I had an arc of this from NetGalley. This is a book that really blew up on TikTok. It originally came out overseas and then was being published in the United States this past month or so. It is a fantasy book with a mystery element that people were raving about, and I did not get super far into this. I only got about 10 to 15% into the story, and I just could not get into the tone of the story. I really did not like the main character. It's a very amateur voice, and I didn't like it. I couldn't get into it. The world building around this one is like each different part of the continent is named after an animal, and there's different powers and things, and I don't know. I just was not getting into it because it just felt so YA, and I'm pretty sure this is an adult book, so that did not work out for me. I also DNF'd My Darling Dreadful Thing. I was reading this one through the library. I got about 30% into the story. This is a historical gothic story that was just not pulling me in. I wasn't super invested in the writing style or the concept of it. Has a great cover, didn't really pull me in with its premise. Also from the library, I had the Dallergut Dream Department Store, which looked really cute. I got 50% into this one. It is a more whimsical story about this main character who works at this department store that sells dreams, and each chapter is kind of going through a different type of dream or a different kind of character that they're interacting with, and it's just one of those like uplifting type of stories. There was nothing really wrong with it. I just got to 50% in and I just didn't really care about the story, so I didn't feel like spending another 50% finishing the story when I didn't feel like I was really going to get a lot out of it. But if you're looking for a cutesy, whimsical kind of story, I would definitely say still check it out. It just wasn't one of those that pulled me in. And then I also DNF'd A Sunny Place for Shady People, which is a short story collection by Mariana Enriquez. I featured this in a vlog that I did earlier in the month. I got a little over 50-ish% into this one. It's just a bunch of short stories about ghosts and hauntings, and they were not bad. There were some memorable moments. Some of the stories I thought were fine to good, but it was just another thing that I wasn't super invested in, and I was having a bad reading month. So if I was 50% into something and I wasn't super interested, I just sat things down this month. Now jumping into the books that I did finish, there are 2 books that I chose to not rate this month. The first one is a nonfiction. I feel like that's a pretty common thing to not really rate a nonfiction book. That is Because We Are Bad by Lily Bailey. This is a memoir told from the perspective of this woman, Lily Bailey, who has OCD, and she is going through her experience starting when she was younger and these brain patterns that she observed, and growing up, and then getting to a diagnosis point and ending on a note of, I have a diagnosis, things are looking up. I have recently been interested in learning a lot more about OCD, and this is the first nonfiction book that I've read specific to OCD. Lily's type of OCD, because there's many different types and many different ways that this manifests in people, is very much related to the compulsive thought that she is a bad person. And it was really interesting to see how that works in her brain and the thought patterns that she finds herself trapped in, and how she got to a point of recognizing that and working with a therapist to try to find ways to break her compulsions. I think she did a nice job with really making you feel like you were in her brain with her. I'm sure, based on how she writes about her experience, that she herself feels very trapped in her brain a lot, and the writing style of that really effectively pulled you into that experience too, as if you can see what it's like to live with these really compulsive thought patterns that are just really consuming to your day-to-day experience. As far as a nonfiction book, I feel like I either love a nonfiction book and it gives me like a 5-star experience, or I don't. And then I don't really have a rating scale for nonfiction just because I don't read as much nonfiction. But I mean, if I had to put a rating on it, I'd probably give it a 3, just for how the overall story comes together, the overall message of it, how effective it is in its like reflectiveness and making observations about that and coming out with something to say versus just like telling you what happened. I'd give it like a 3. I thought it was okay. It is the first of a couple OCD books that I am interested in reading, and it is the first encounter I've had with this particular type of OCD, with the compulsive thought that you're a bad person, and that was just very eye-opening to get some more context around. The other book that I chose to not rate is The Widow's Husband's Secret Lie by Freida McFadden. This is a novella that Freida McFadden came out with in August. Didn't even know it was coming out. Randomly found it on Kindle Unlimited when I was looking for something to read on my Kindle, and it's labeled like a satire story, a satire novella or something. I was thinking, okay, I've been having kind of problems with Freida McFadden's writing. Maybe a story in the framework of satire will actually work better for me in this concept. The concept of this is you're following this woman whose husband has died, and then she like keeps thinking she's seeing him around. What happened? That's about all I can say because it's pretty short. I chose not to rate this because I thought it was really bad, but also like it's framed as a satire story. And it's definitely leaning into cliche, but satire should not mean bad, you know? And so I was having a hard time in my brain separating, this is horrible, but it's also like intentionally satire, but I don't think it's trying to intentionally be as bad as I felt like it was. This feels like a writing exercise for the author that would be kind of cathartic and refreshing to just dump something out and to just be silly with it as a break in between your books, or like to help you get out of a writer's block. Did I need to read it? Like, does it need to be published? I don't know. That's what I find myself saying with like all of Freida McFadden's stuff recently is, did this need to exist? In my opinion, I don't know. The other Freida McFadden book that I read this month is The Housemaid is Watching, which is the 3rd book in the Housemaid series. I ended up rating this a 2-star, and I did film an entire video where I give you full spoilers and my full review. I give you a non-spoiler review, a spoiler review, talk about the series all together. So I won't exhaust myself going into it all over again in this video. But basically, it's just continuing to follow the main character from the 1st book in the Housemaid series, and I just think it's getting less and less interesting as it goes on. I did enjoy the 1st book in that series. I keep enjoying them less as the series goes on. Hopefully this will be the last one. I basically just kind of read it because I was bored, not having a good reading month, looking for something easy, and it's probably gonna be in the Goodreads Choice Awards. So yeah, didn't love it. A disappointment for me this month is All This and More by Pink Shepherd. I was really excited about this book. I actually have not read from Pink Shepherd before, but I have heard of their other books and stuff, and this one in particular just sounded so interesting to me. Interesting enough that I did buy the physical copy, and then I just was so disappointed in how the story went. The concept of this one is that there's this reality TV show called All This and More, where basically they create this sort of quantum bubble, and a contestant can go on and experience all the different choices they could have made in life, and then try to come out of it with their perfect life and decide like, oh, what would have happened if I actually went to dental school? What would have happened if I never married my first husband? What would have happened if I, you know, pursued this other career path that I was thinking about? And it is a very cool concept, and the book is actually a choose your own adventure story in itself as well, because you're following the 3rd season of this show. There's a new main character who is going to be the contestant in the show, and you're following her experience as she's going through the show. And every time she comes to a decision, you get to make the decision with her, where at the bottom of the page, it will give you a couple options for what choice that she's going to make, and then tell you to jump to a different page to read depending on whichever experience you want her to have. That is particularly why I wanted the physical copy, because I wanted to be able to flip back and forth and just relive that fun experience that I had as a kid with choose your own adventure stories of like bookmarking and reading one path and then reading the other path and seeing what I liked more. So I was pretty excited for this, but I think the execution was pretty lackluster. The story was super repetitive in the way it was playing out, and it was happening so quickly. I obviously expected there to be a lot of different experiences that the main character was going to have, but I anticipated spending a little bit more time really seeing them through. What ended up happening in the story is that the main character would make a decision and say, I want to see what happens in this life, and then for about 2 to 3 pages be in that life. You would get one scene of them in that life, and then they would start regretting it or questioning it, have a discussion with the host of the show, and then immediately say, let's go see another path, let's make another choice. And it just kept happening, where it's so quick of just one scene in a new life, regret, next scene. One scene in a new life, regret, next scene. And that did not give me enough time to really sit with this main character and understand anything really about her, the people in her life, giving her time to really meditate on her choices, really see a path through. It's just like flipping through channels on the TV, and each channel is a different, movie showing how your life could have gone. And instead of watching, the full movie to see what would happen if I did that, you watch like 5 minutes and they go, oh, I don't know. Oh, I don't know that this is right either. I don't know. Then the book takes some weird paths. I didn't really enjoy the ending half. It had like an interesting reveal or twist that explains some things going on in the story. But by that point, I was just so not lost in it, but I lost investment in it by that point. I wasn't really caring about these characters, and I didn't really care about how the main character's life did play out. And in a story like this, I want to feel really, really close to that main character, and it just did not work out for me in this one. Another disappointment that I had this month was The Haters by Robin Harding. I was looking forward to this because I loved Robin Harding's book last year, The Drowning Woman. I was very much looking forward to her next book. I will say the premise of this did not sound wildly interesting to me because the concept of it is that the main character is an author. She publishes a book, she gets a hater who is messaging her and then potentially like coming to disrupt her life. That didn't sound as interesting to me because I already read and really loved The Last Word by Taylor Adams last year, which had a very similar concept. And so just because I felt like it's something I've already read before, I wasn't overly hooked, but because I've loved a book from Robin Harding before, I was looking forward to her next novel. This one just ended up also being pretty repetitive and pretty boring. You end up with a lot of suspects for who this online hater could be, and a lot of the story feels a bit more like a suburban drama following a mom who's going through challenges with her ex-husband, with her teenage daughter, and now she has this online hater. I felt like so much of the beginning portion of the book was just a repetitive behavior of getting a message from the online hater and then worrying about it and wondering about it and just kind of like looping that over and over and over again for a long time. Because there were so many suspects, I wasn't overly invested in the reveal of the story, and you also get portions of the author's book within this book, and I didn't feel like that added much to the story, and I also did not like that book. I feel like that might have been intentional that it was not good, but I didn't like it, and so it kept pulling me out of the story, and I did not enjoy that. All in all, I ended up giving this a 2-star. Did not have a good time with it. I will still look out for Robin Harding's next book because I have enjoyed other things from her in the past, and then I really loved her most recent book. Hopefully I have better success with the next one. I just kind of threw the Black Maybe here. This is a short story collection that I believe I talked about in my July wrap up. I had not finished it at that point. I still kind of didn't finish it. I read probably most of the stories in this, but there's some that I skipped because by the end I just was kind of losing interest in the collection. Overall, I'm giving it a 3-star. There were some stories I did really like, some stories that just didn't really do it for me. It was kind of like I was going into each story feeling like it was going to be a hit or miss by the time I got to the end, and then I was just losing investment. But it's a short story collection that is translated from a Hungarian author, Attila Verez, who is apparently Hungary's leading horror writer, and this was his English debut. There are 10 stories in here. They are all horror stories. Some of them are more weird and bizarre than others. It was a book that I picked up on vacation at a local bookstore. That was a staff recommendation, which I just like to do when I'm visiting a new bookstore, and I thought it was okay. I'm not really sure what else this author has out, but if I was looking at a full-length novel from this author, I would definitely look into the synopsis because I feel like there were 2 distinct types of stories in this collection, and the one type I really liked, the other type not so much. So if I were looking at more from them, I would kind of know which one would probably be more interesting to me. Next is The Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. I ended up giving this a 3-star rating, and I did feature this in a reading vlog that I did earlier in the month where I was seeing if my reading stats could predict my next 5-star reads. This one was not a 5-star read. Although the other books I've read from Janice Hallett have been 5-star reads for me. I really like how she crafts her mysteries. She does them entirely in mixed media. This one was not as dynamic as the other books that I've read from her. The concept of this one is you're following this man who's recently gotten out of prison, and he is reflecting on his experiences he had when he was a child, when he was in this remedial English class, and his teacher read this book to them that was a banned book. It was written by this author with the last name Twyford, and the teacher seemed to think there was a code hidden in the writing from this author, and she was like trying to decode the book. The teacher ended up going missing, and now all these years later, this man is reflecting on that, wondering what happened, investigating it, getting his old classmates back together, and trying to crack the code if there is one to crack. The concept was cool, The story overall was not the most engaging to me. I was a little bit bored through the middle, but then it had a really interesting explanation in the end for what was going on that made me really appreciate this and the whole framing of the story. All in all, I still have not hated a book from Janice Hallett. I have given them all 5 stars or 3, so still going strong with Janice Hallett's works, and very excited to check out her new book, The Examiner, which I believe is coming out in September. A quick little short story / novella that I read this month was The Mosquito by B.A. Paris. This is part of a Kindle Unlimited collection that is 6 different stories, and I think this one was called the Obsession collection. If you have seen these, there's like the Creature Feature collection. I actually can't think of any more because that's the main one I've seen, but this one I think was called the Obsession collection. This is the only one I've read out of it so far. I've read and enjoyed stuff from B.A. Paris before. I was looking for just something quick to read. That was a lot of what was going on this month, is I just was not having a good reading experience, so I was looking for anything that could potentially be something that I would enjoy to read. I ended up giving this a 3-star. I thought it was fine. It was a little bit forgettable. You're following a few couples who are going on vacation together in this vacation house. You're mainly following this one main character who is recently going through a divorce. There's another guy on the trip whose wife has recently died, and that guy is really just giving him a hard time about like, oh, why did your wife leave you? Like, oh, at least your wife didn't die. It's just really weird environment. And then the main character is also getting bitten by mosquitoes a lot, hence why it's called The Mosquito. It was short, it was quick, it was fine. It escalated a lot at the end, but all in all, I thought it was okay, so I gave it a 3. I do think I'm gonna try to read some of the other stories in this Obsession collection, just whenever I feel like picking something up that's short. Another 3-star I had this month was Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. I read this on audio through my library, and I've been hearing a lot of good buzz for this. I ended up feeling like it was just okay for me. Could also be impacted by my overall horrible reading month that I had. This is a story where we're following a Hollywood writer named Misha, who has been writing this TV show for a long time and is now getting pressure from the studio executives to kill off his gay characters. Misha does not want to do that. Misha is sick of gay tragedy, but is getting a lot of pushback from the studio executives, and then things take a strange turn. And the synopsis does not give a lot of information about what that strange turn is. That was also the case for Camp Damascus, the last horror book that Chuck Tingle wrote, which had a very vague synopsis, and I thought I was getting into one thing with that story, and then you read it and you're like, oh, okay, it's a little bit different. Bury Your Gaze also had a kind of vague synopsis, and because of that experience with Camp Damascus, I was kind of going in ready for anything. I was like, I don't know, this story could be about literally anything, because Chuck Tingle does not tell you a lot in the synopsis. You just have to kind of go in and see what you're gonna get. And I thought it was an interesting concept. There was an interesting reveal related to everything that was going on, but I don't know. Overall, I just felt like it was an okay story. I didn't hate it, didn't love it. That's kind of how I felt about Camp Damascus as well. I think I gave Camp Damascus a 3 or a 3.5. Thought it was okay. Thought this one was okay. I don't think I'm gonna be rushing to pick up Chuck Tingle's next book, but I do feel like the general public or the general horror audience really has been loving these, so maybe something to check out if it's not on your radar. Next up is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, which was translated by Sophie Hughes. And this was my buddy read for the 24-hour horror-a-thon in the month of August, and I ended up rating this a 3.5. This book is very highly acclaimed. It was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in I think 2020, but I feel like I've never really heard much of what the story is about other than something to do with a witch. So I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting into with this one, but because it's so highly acclaimed, I was like, oh, it'll probably be good. And I do think it's an interesting story. I didn't really have an expectation for it, but it wasn't really what I expected at the same time. And it was a little difficult to read, especially in the first half, because the author leaves you in the dark on a lot of things. But I will say that made the second half of the story a satisfying experience to feel like, ah, okay, I finally see what's happening. So let me tell you generally what this book is about. The story's set in Mexico in a particular village, and the story begins with a corpse being found. It turns out that there is a witch in the village, and the witch is now dead. As the story unfolds, it is less of a whodunit and more of a whydunit, and you're getting all the context for what has gone on in the village and with this group of people, and building on the story and building on your understanding of the story as the chapters go on. Each chapter focuses on a different character and gives you their piece of the story. So in the beginning, you just have the tiniest little bit of information, and for the first 3 or 4 chapters, you're like, what is going on? Who is this person? How is this person connected to this person? Where is the story going? Where is it building? But once you get into the second half, you have a much better understanding of it. You you have more context for what's going on. And I feel like the second half, the chapters feel more meaningful because, for me at least, I was able to follow those a lot better than I was in the first half of the story, where I was just really having to use a lot of my attention to figure out what was going on. Also, the writing in this, kind of dense. So pretty much every page looks like this. And sometimes the whole page or even the whole 2 pages is one sentence. This book truly had the longest sentences that I've ever read in my life. On the reading sprints that I did, I even read one sentence from this book in the reading sprints. And so you can hear that to see how long these sentences are. And that's a really interesting writing choice. In one way, it gets you like really lost in the story because it's just going on and on and on and on and on. Like lost in a good way, like really like, you know, in it. But in another way, it might get you lost in like it's losing your attention span, which was what was happening to me in the beginning, because sometimes, you know, your eyes kind of skim over something or you find your brain wandering a little bit when you're reading. And so you go back to the start of a sentence and read it again. But with this, it's like if you're going back to the start of a sentence, sometimes you're going back 2 pages and it's a lot to get, you know, reacclimated in the story. Anyways, what the story ends up really being about is the patriarchy, violence against women, misogyny, myth, homophobia, internalized homophobia, a lot of really heavy topics, and it was gruesome. There are some really graphic, gruesome, triggering things in this story. I was not expecting it to be as dark as it was at times. There's also the use of slurs. Like, it's just not a book to read if you're not in the right headspace for it. But in general, I would say I was kind of intimidated by it because I feel like I'm just always intimidated by Booker List prize winners or long list selections. It's readable, it's understandable, it takes patience and it takes attention. Next up is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. I also read this in that reading vlog where I was seeing if my reading stats could predict a 5-star read. Ended up giving this one a 3.5 star. It is a contemporary romance story about these 2 people who are both authors. And 20 years ago, they had 1 week together, 7 days in June, back when they were teenagers, where they basically trauma bonded, I feel like is the best way to explain it. It was like a romantic connection, but it was, you know, it was a trauma bond. They were both going through a lot of difficult things in those 7 days in June. Now you're following them 20 years later, and like I said, they're both authors. They've both been kind of writing about or to the other one in their stories over the years, but they have not been connected. And now they're bumping back into each other and they're getting a little second chance at their connection. I wasn't the most invested in the romance between these characters because of the nature of their connection, and I don't know, like it was just a little bit hard for me as not a super romantic person to feel like these were fated characters because of 7 days that they spent together, and like 20 years later coming back together. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just not a super romantic person. But in general, the writing, the character building, the way the story all comes together, I did enjoy it. This is the first thing I read from Tia Williams. I do also have a love song for Ricky Wilde, I think it's called, on my radar. So I think I'll read from her again. And overall, I'd say it was a good time. Next up is The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. This is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series, and I read this one on audio from my library way back at the beginning of August, so it feels like it's been a while now. And all these books are kind of starting to blend together in my mind a little bit. It's hard for me to remember the distinction between books 2 and 3 specifically. So I don't feel like I have a lot of unique things to say about this, but maybe that works out anyways because it's the 3rd book in a series and maybe, you know, you don't want to hear spoilers for anything. So I'll just talk generically about how I'm still feeling about the series. I gave this one a 3.5. I enjoyed it. I'm still just enjoying the series in general. I feel like all of my thoughts about the books kind of are the same, in that the nature of the mysteries that these characters are solving usually involves some external characters, some external exposition and background and history to learn about because they're trying to solve these other mysteries for other characters. Whereas I'm someone who really enjoys when the story is mostly focused on our 4 main characters and when there's particular mysteries to uncover about their lives and the things that are going on with them, or when they get put in dangerous situations. That's when I'm the most invested in the stories and the series in general. So that's always been kind of my main complaint for the series, is I do wish it was a little bit more focused on that versus like each one you're introducing new characters and it's external things and, you know, external histories of all these things. But those moments you do get of the main characters, the relationships they're forming with each other and with other people, I really like that. I really like watching these characters grow and evolve together, and I just feel like I would keep reading this series for as long as it goes on. So I am planning on reading the 4th book in September, and that is as much as we have right now. And then Richard Osman is starting another series with another book that's coming out in September September called We Solve Murders. So I'm gonna get all caught up on Thursday Murder Club. I'm gonna be ready for the new series. I just feel like this series is such an easy read. It's such a dependable thing. Like, oh, I'm just gonna get the audiobook and put it on and have a good time. So I do like it for that. I don't love them as much as I know some people do, but I do like them. I have a good time with them, and yeah, I'm excited to continue. Next up is Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 4th book in the Throne of Glass series. I've been trying to read 1 book a month throughout the series over the year. Some months I get a little bit behind, but I'm still mostly doing okay. In August, I finished Queen of Shadows, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4-star, and I will say, outside of The Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel novella collection, which I also gave a 4-star, this is my favorite book in the core series so far. I was a little bit nervous when I did not enjoy Heir of Fire as much, because I feel like Heir of Fire is where a lot of people say it's where the story really picks up and gets going, and that's a book that'll really get you invested in the series, and a lot does change for the story and the story structure in that one. But Queen of Shadows is the one that I feel like really got me going in the series, and now I'm excited to see what happens next. I really liked just the setup of this one. You're getting a lot of the characters back together who've been dispersed. Your main character is getting more interesting again. She's bringing out her badass qualities again. She's like on a mission. There is some scheming. There are things to accomplish. There is character development to happen. It just felt like the action picked back up. I felt like in Heir of Fire, things were so slow because it was such a change in the structure of just like getting some characters in some different places, introducing some new people, introducing the new story structure of separating the perspectives out a little bit more, and it just felt so slow and like a transition novel. And this one, I was like, there's action, like I'm liking the writing style better. It was just a good time. I felt like it was a really solid installment in the series, and I just feel like I'm starting to get close. I'm getting closer to finishing the series now. It's starting to feel like an accomplishment, and I'm excited to continue the next one in September. And then my favorite book of the month was my one singular 5-star read of the month, which is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This is one of the books that was on my list of backlist books that I want to get to in 2024. At the beginning of the year, I did a video where I think I talked about 10 books that I wanted to read this year that were backlist books, and I think this is the 5th one that I've read now, so I'm about halfway through that list. I keep watching that video all the time throughout the year to refresh myself on what I want to get through and to make sure I'm pacing okay to get through everything by the end of the year, and I think I'm gonna do it. I think I'm gonna get through all of them. This is the one that I got through in the month of August, and I am so glad that I finally picked it up. I really enjoyed this. Everyone talks about this book in a very ambiguous way, and that is because that is kind of what you want to go into the story with. You don't want to go into the story with too much knowledge. It is kind of an ambiguous book. It's not super plot heavy. It's more meditative, I would say. It's a dystopian sci-fi type of story where you're following a group of women who are being held in an underground bunker. All they have really ever known is being held in that bunker, and they have these men who are the guards who come down and monitor them and feed them. In particular, there is one character who's much younger than the other women, and she's your main character in the story. And all the additional details that the synopsis tells you is that soon she will show herself to be the key to the others' escape and survival in the strange world that awaits them above. This is a pretty short story. It's just a little novella, and it reads really quickly. I think I read it in 2 sittings. I think the best way to describe this is that it really is just a meditation on life and humanity and exploring the question of what is it to have a life that's well lived. It really feels like a kind of metaphor or a conceit for wondering what the purpose of life is. And I feel like I've been very meditative on that question just generally lately anyways. I am not a religious person, and I feel like for a lot of people the purpose of life for them is religion. I am not a parent, and I feel like for a lot of people the purpose of life for them is their children, and so I've sort of been in this headspace lately of just meditation on that question. And you know, I don't know, it's a weird thing, and if I sit and spiral on it for too long, I'm spiraling. So anyways, I just feel like this book found me at the right time, and I feel like I could read it over and over and over again. I feel like it's a book I would want to return to at different times in my life, and I just really enjoyed it. Definitely recommend it, and recommend going in with not a ton of information. So that is it for all the books I read in the month of August. Like I said, not the best reading month, but potentially had a favorite of the year come out of it, which is always fun. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you think. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!